Welcome back to TJWalker.com. TJ, today news coming out that in 2018, Russia will be hosting the World Cup, and in 2022, Qatar, in a surprise, not the US, will be hosting the World Cup. To quote the famous sports writer Bill Simmons on Twitter, anytime you could host a soccer match in the middle of summer in 150-degree weather, in front of people who have no allegiance to soccer, you have to do it. TJ, what are the PR benefits for Qatar in this situation? Again, all the buzz on Twitter, all the articles, all the columnists that are following this, Qatar just sort of coming out of nowhere. They were in the contention, in the running, but against such heavy hitters as the US, pretty much a shock.
Well, that's a great quote from Salmon, fantastic humor there. But Qatar is an interesting place, and it is a place where I've spent a fair amount of time. And they have a particular government strategy. They have seen other oil-rich countries not develop economies on anything based on, other than what's based on oil. So they are specifically trying to have an economy based on education, on tourism, on commerce, on culture. So they have invested dramatically in universities, but also in sports. There are a tremendous number of major tournaments and all sorts of sports there. And what they've done is they said, you know what, we could just spend a fortune on more arms and more gigantic monuments to our kings. We're not going to do that. They are building huge, huge sports monuments and fantastic facilities. So if you're an international sports federation, you're looking for a place to hold events, and someone comes to you and says, look, we are building the absolute best of everything, the newest of everything. We're subsidizing things massively. I have a hard time understanding why that's a bad thing. I think it's frankly a lot worse when a government, say for the city of Cleveland, spends tax dollars from average, normal, poor people to build a sports stadium than it is for an extraordinarily rich country like Qatar. They're not asking taxpayers to pay income tax to subsidize this event. So in my mind, it's a lot less of an unscrupulous situation than what goes on with London, New York, LA, where average taxpayers are asked to foot the bill.
And TJ, this is certainly a situation, as you mentioned, where rich country paying for all of this, hopefully that the burden won't go to the rest of the population. But if you look back just a few months ago, 2010 World Cup in South Africa, there are major concerns now about all the billions of dollars poured into the infrastructure there for these stadiums, basically sitting idly by. They can't fill these stadiums. There's no one to use these stadiums. $50 million a year just to keep up the maintenance of the main stadium. Same situation going on from the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. What about the long-term effects for, let's go back to South Africa and to Beijing, these glittering monuments that they had in that moment, but now 3-4 years out, they're pretty much going to be unused.
They're hideous monstrosities. I just toured the Olympic facility in Australia a few months ago. It's a ghost town. It's a huge boondoggle. So this is one of these rare situations where, from my perspective, it doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a conservative. It's great that a place like Qatar gets. If you're a liberal, you have to think, wow, here's an example of the very wealthiest subsidizing the rest of the world and the poor world, so that people in South Africa, the poor peasants there, don't have to subsidize the tournament. If you're a conservative, you say, hey, this is the free market. If they want to spend their money, let them do it. So I'm at a loss as to why this is possibly a bad thing, Mike.
Well, for Qatar and for the reputation of the World Cup, I don't necessarily think that it is a good thing, just because of all the surprise.
But why does it matter? I mean, most people in the world are watching it on TV. They do have TV cameras in Qatar.
Most people in the world are watching it on TV, but it really has that air and that smell of corruption in some way. Same thing with Russia in 2018. You had such great bids coming from places like London and the US. And this goes on during the Olympic bids as well. And again, we look back years after the fact, and this sort of corruption does come out. So that might not be the case in Qatar, because they might not even...
But if there is corruption, again, I sound like I'm speaking of the Chamber of Commerce of Qatar. I'm not on their payroll, believe me. But if there is corruption, it strikes me that this is the absolute least corrupt way you can do it. At least unwitting taxpayers are not getting stuck with it. No one asked me if they're going to rebuild a Giants stadium or a Madison Square Garden or Meadowlands Stadium, but yet I get stuck with a bill. The average taxpayer of Qatar is not going to get stuck with a bill because they've got these massive, massive natural gas reserves with all the money there. So it's either spend the money on that or weapons. I think we're all better off with them spending it on sports facilities.
I would concur with that, and we'll end on that note. 2018 going to Russia, 2022 going to Qatar. TJ Walker, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.